Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense's Biollywood Podcast series. In this podcast series, we will discuss biological threats that appear in movies, TV, novels, games, and those that are just popular in popular culture in general. My name is JT O'Brien. I am a research associate with the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and I'm here with Dr. Asha George, who is the executive director, and we will be your hosts for today's podcast. Today, we'll be discussing the film Hidden from 2015. Hidden is a psychological thriller about a family that takes refuge in a bomb shelter to avoid a dangerous outbreak. The film is directed by the Duffer Brothers, who also direct Stranger Things, and also features Alexander Skarsgård, Andrea Riseborough, and Emily Alyn Lind. Spoiler alert, if you have not seen this movie, we would highly recommend you go watch it before continuing this podcast. It has one of the best twists in any apocalyptic disease movie we have seen. This is your final warning. From this point forward, spoilers will be discussed.
Okay.
What do you want to start with, Asha?
Well, maybe we should start with the timeline and the realism of the scenario.
Yeah.
That they discuss or they portray in the movie. They get into it pretty quickly, right? I think they just show a little bit of idyllic life before some horrible thing is happening, right? Then suddenly people are panicking and everybody's running around and people are in cars and everybody's trying to get out. And it's all very confusing. And then suddenly the family that is portrayed in this movie is stopped. There's a big traffic situation.
Thing, yeah. The military, I think, is preventing them.
The military...
from leaving, right?
Is preventing them. Well, we find out that it's the military. I don't know that we know at that.
We don't know at that point.
Moment in time if it's the military, and then you start seeing things happen. I think there's an airplane in the sky. Stuff is happening. Suddenly, we see explosions, and then everybody is running around all over the place.
Right.
And this family runs to an underground bunker that I guess the mom in the family knew about somehow from school. Just right next to the elementary school.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that we know that this is a disease-related movie. So it's interesting to me that basically you go from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
That they didn't know anything was going on, or we don't know as an audience whether, maybe there were some reports in social media or on the news about, hey, maybe this person got sick, that person got sick. We just don't know anything about it. I don't know how realistic that would be. Would we just not know anything?
Yeah, that was something that I thought was a little bit odd too. I feel like you would have some kind of warning, whether it might be a few days or a week, if anything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything that could onset that quickly. That it would be, one moment you're having dinner with your family, and the next minute there's F-16s flying overhead.
Right.
But it could be from the perspective of that family. Maybe they just, us as being, professionals in this field might be more attuned to something like that than, the average American.
Maybe, or they just maybe they were on a social media fast.
Right.
Maybe they're one of those families that doesn't have a TV in their house.
Right.
One of the things that the dad does, Alexander Skarsgård's character, when they get into their car finally to go somewhere, he does turn on the radio.
Yeah.
But he's not hearing anything other than, I think, some public service announcements about something.
Right.
Something's happening. So I don't know. I just don't know. I guess it depends on what it is. But what I think is a little funny about it is that I suppose, of course, it's possible that something could have started and moved so quickly that some people, including this family, were not immediately or very soon aware of. I think that's possible. But what I think is funny is, how on earth would the federal government have found out about it before they did?
Right. That
quick
response, I don't think is, we saw it with COVID. It's not It's not realistic.
That's realistic, yeah.
Yeah, it's not realistic that within day 1 or 2, you're going to have, a decision made to start bombing, a local town. Or
I don't
city or
think so.
anything
And then
like
who knows with the bombing? I mean, that could have been somebody, some private or something in an aircraft that saw something and was nervous and set off, shot at somebody. It might not necessarily have been a directed, go do this,
right.
Execute this order. Now, there is a possibility in which DOD might find out, or the federal government might find out before locals, and that is if there was a case of a disease, one case or a few cases that did show up in a hospital somewhere, and the disease was so freaky and so scary that they did alert somebody. Somebody decides, okay, we're going to call the CDC. If it doesn't spread very quickly, or even if it does, if somebody thinks to do that quickly, the CDC, especially now, I would say with telemedicine and stuff, they might say, okay, we have to alert the Department of Defense, or we have to alert the governor, or we have to do something. Then I suppose it is possible. But I would say that in this movie, the virus seems to move so unbelievably quickly.
Yeah.
There's no time to do anything.
Right.
So, I don't know. I mean, of course, it's a movie, so we have to have some drama there.
Some creative license.
So it's basically, it starts with that. And the vast majority of the movie is spent with them in this underground bunker.
Right.
So that's really where the timeline starts for them.
Right.
Now, we do have the mother cutting her
hand. Yeah.
And then looking at the two, her husband and her daughter, in horror and saying it's airborne.
And she's infected. So that she should not have that much information at that point in time, I feel like.
That's true, because they didn't know what was going on.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, she just ran in, right? Were they closing?
They were closing the bunker door. Yeah, and then she got cut by the rust.
Yeah.
On the way in, and then immediately after was like, I think I might be.
And she said it was airborne.
Yes, and she said it was airborne.
Right. So I'm not sure how she made the connection between cutting herself and it's airborne.
Yeah, she's really airborne.
So airborne. Not only is it airborne, it's also
persistent in the air.
Persistent and also on surfaces.
Yeah.
Such that if you cut yourself, you're absorbing the microorganism through your hand or whatever got cut.
Right.
Now, maybe that's just an editing problem. Maybe there was something between there. Maybe they heard something. Maybe people were screaming things.
Or it could be a cut scene.
A cut scene. Maybe they heard it on the radio.
Yeah. And we just, as the audience,
we just didn't know. Which is good, because part of the movie is you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know really what's happening on. Yeah.
And then at that point, do we know how long they're in the bunker?
Not off the top of my head.
I don't think they say.
I don't think they say how long
they're inside. They're tracking time somehow, because they turn lights on and stuff to simulate daytime inside the bunker. And they can see up the shaft, they can see a little bit of the sky. So they're going to know. And they know that breathers have come around there. Right. So now we have this thing with the breathers. Let's talk about the breathers. Yeah, let's talk about the breathers. So we do have the breathers. They refer to them as breathers, not the audience. But we don't know what they are or who they are. Right. But I do remember when I first watched the film, I'm like, that's a really weird name for a zombie. But why did you decide they were zombies? The way the film presents itself is that these are people trying to hide from the outbreak. So like when they say breathers, the first thought that comes to mind is that those are people who are infected. Okay. That was my first thought. Why did you think they were zombies? It seemed like a zombie apocalypse scenario. I feel like there's no other scenario where you'd have that extreme of a response from the government. It couldn't have just been a normal, even something as bad as, 3 times as bad as COVID. I don't think you would see that response from the government where they are sending in F-16s to bomb a town. I don't know if I can't remember if I thought they were zombies or not. I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah.
I don't remember what I thought, but I guess I must have assumed.
I thought they were zombies.
It's like whoever's been infected.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Some upper respiratory
something. Yeah. Like they have to have some kind of special air, but then like that would also imply that whoever was infected was extremely resilient and smart and able to figure these things out.
Yeah, so unlikely. So it's
unlikely. Yeah,
I'm not questioning your determination that it was a zombie. I think you were supposed to make that jump.
Yeah, right, to make that jump, and that's what I thought the first time I watched it. Was that these breathers were the zombies? But in the back of my head, I'm like, breather does not make sense as a name for a zombie. It just did not. We don't know
why they're being called breathers.
Right. You didn't know why.
Yeah, I think they're doing a good job of posing all these questions that the audience can't answer from the information that you can see amongst this little family in this bunker.
Right.
I do think that it's interesting, though, that with the breathers, they did a great job of really dragging that out.
Yeah.
You don't figure that out until
the very end of the film.
Nearly the very end of the movie. And then all things become clear. But before that, though, there is an interesting thing that's happening in this timeline, which I think is something we don't talk about a lot when it comes to disease stuff. And I don't know how much a part of it is a part of it, like what we consider to be the disease collection of symptoms,
right?
When we talk about something, but there's this whole thing that starts to happen with the little girl.
Yeah, and the rules.
Dad. Yeah, so we have these rules, very specific rules. When I first started hearing the rules, I just thought, well, they're just trying to keep things orderly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're trying to hide.
And they have this little girl, and she needs rules. She needs some structure. She doesn't understand what's happening, and I don't know that they could adequately explain it anyway, but they know a little bit more than she does. But you also have the father trying to keep her calm. She seems to get upset and too upset.
Right.
And I, of course, I don't have children, so neither do I. I don't know whether children of that age, I guess she was in elementary school, so 5 or 6. 6
or 7.
Maybe they just get upset every once in a while.
Right.
You do have to calm them down. But that seems to be, a very important role.
Yes.
That is played by the dad with her and by the mother in different ways. The mother is just trying to keep things battened down.
Yeah,
She's the one that's on about the rules. The dad's not so much about the rules, but he does have to get involved in keeping her calm.
Right.
We see that a few times.
A few times throughout the film.
So that's part of the timeline and the progression we find out of the disease. There's this emotional component. I'm not aware of any diseases. Are you that have an emotional component other than feeling like terrible that you're sick?
Not a strictly emotional component, but I do know that there are some that do have an effect on the brain directly. There's one that I'm forgetting, and I might have to cut this in.
Okay.
But it's a disease that normally affects cats. They're kind of like the end cycle.
Okay.
So it starts in, I think, it's a parasite that starts in like a rat or something like that.
Okay.
The cat eats the rat. The parasite gets passed on. But what the parasite is doing to the rat is it makes it less averse to fear.
Okay.
So it makes it more likely to, just stand in front of the cat and not run. Okay. So that it gets eaten up by the cat. The cat then has the disease. And the same thing will happen to the cat. The cat will have a fear aversion. And there's actually been studies with people who have had cats that have this disease that, have passed it on to humans, that those humans will also be more risk averse. Or not risk averse. They'll be more likely to...
Fear averse.
They're fear averse. Yeah, they're more fear averse. So, they might be more likely to walk through a crosswalk where the light isn't, green yet.
Oh.
So things like that. So there are things that can affect your behavior and your mental state. So I don't think it's too far off to think that there's an emotional.
But in that case, it's a parasite. Is it replicating in the brain? It's not just affecting it, right?
I think it might just be affecting the brain.
Okay.
But I'm not sure
Either way,
if it's in there. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's in there or not, but that's like an example of something that could just...
So it's possible.
It's possible that there could be a pathogen or something like that would affect your emotional state in some way or another.
Okay.
So I think it's possible.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's not wholly unrealistic.
Right, yeah.
It
could be part of a disease.
Okay.
Where like, the way it's presented in the movie, I mean, like it's like, I don't know, you see that there are, certain groups of people where if they get too emotionally, triggered or anything like that, have anger problems.
Right.
Or, things like that. So I think it might just be one step above that.
Okay.
But it also begs the question whether or not this was designed, I feel like. And I think the fast response from the government might indicate that it was.
That's really interesting. I never thought that it might have been designed. Do we know where they are? Do they tell us what part of the country they're in?
They don't. Based on like the landscape, I think I told you before, I thought it might have been like Washington or somewhere, in the western part of the United States.
Yes, it does. To me, it looked like it was kind of Midwest. There was kind of like scrub brush.
Yeah, scrub brush, like big mountains, kind of.
Yeah, kind of very mountainous, rocky kind of terrain.
Rocky terrain. So
it could be Colorado, which would be near a CDC laboratory out there. Although I don't think the CDC would be engaging in designed organisms,
like, especially one that was.
It's not their thing, right? Yeah. So, but the military is out there too. I mean, of course, we have the military all over the place. So do you think it was designed by the United States, or do you think it was designed by another country and somehow got here?
So that's the hard part about this movie.
Biological attack.
Because we don't see what happens in the rest of the world. We only are seeing what happens, not even just in the United States, but this very localized part of the United States.
Right.
Who knows? The East Coast could be unaffected. And it could just be that these people are underground for who knows how long.
Right.
But it also, like, I mean, if it came from the United States, I would not think it would be intentional. I think it would be an accident. It would be an accidental thing. Like, I don't think you could intentionally make this kind of a.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Okay. So I mentioned the military, but I don't actually think our military is not engaged in active offensive biological weapons.
Exactly.
So if it was an accidental release, it would be by academia.
Right. It would be by academia.
Or some industry organization that's genetically designing something.
Right. And I could see that as being a potential route for this actually happening. Like if someone's like, oh, like, what if we can make something that makes people more calm? And then you have the opposite result. Kind of like what happened when researchers tried to use AI to make drugs that were less toxic. All they had to do was change one flip, that toxicity variable, and then all of a sudden they can make chemical weapons.
Right.
So it could be something like that where it's
unintentional,
but you have the best intentions, but all it takes is one switch, to change it from making somebody more calm to somebody more.
But I think this illustrates difficulty.
Yeah.
With attribution.
Yeah.
Because your first thought was it could be not first, but you had a thought that it could have been designed.
It could have been designed.
I never thought that at all. It never occurred to me. If I thought anything, I thought this is some weird mutation.
Right.
And something has happened in this area for whatever reason. We do have a scene midway through the movie where we see deer or something bounding around.
Yes.
So it made me wonder.
Where is it spilling over?
Is it spilling over from humans to animals? Did it start in the animal community?
Yeah.
And go the other direction?
Right. Kind of like that other parasite I was talking about before that starts in the.
Well, there's plenty, right? I mean.
Well, yeah.
Aren't they saying now that most of our like horrible diseases are zoonotic?
Yeah, they're spilling over.
Go either direction.
Right. At least 75%.
I'm trying to remember, though, in that scene, when we see the deer running around, are they just running? Are they just bounding? Or are they acting weird?
That's what made it hard to tell, because, like, this is another part of, like, the twist of
Yeah.
the movie is like, are they just running from the breathers? Or are they
just running. They're
running, or are they affected? Like,
and we don't know how long they were underground. So
Right.
if everybody has disappeared, if all humans have disappeared, we know what happens. The animals just move back in.
exactly, yeah, the animals will move back in
So
and they'll take
yeah,
over.
they could have heard something that spooked them. But there is a possibility that they were behaving the way they were behaving because their brains too
infected.
have been infected.
Right.
They're just
A little bit more aggressive, or a little bit more,
whatever.
fear resistant. I think, they're just not as calm. And then deer are not usually a calm.
Anyway, they're kind of skittish.
They're kind of skittish.
And these people have been underground. We see that in that particular scene, they have come up above ground.
Right.
So in terms of the timeline, so we're moving through this. There's a fire.
Right.
An accidental fire that occurs
the ash.
underground. And the ash goes up, the smoke goes up, and now this family has to deal with having basically created a signal.
Right, a signal flare of where they are.
And so now they have to deal with this. And that's why they're now
going
above ground. And they left a little girl in the underground bunker, but she's looking. They have rigged up some kind of periscope, something or other.
Yeah, they have a periscope that looks up.
And looks around, which is smart.
Which is, great idea.
Looking around.
Yeah.
And now we have this fear, like, okay, now the breathers they're coming.
They're coming, yeah.
Whatever and whoever the breathers are, they're coming. Lots of drama with that. Lots of looking straight up. I wonder for the actors, how many hours they spent just looking up and looking like tense and scared.
Yeah.
But then the breathers enter, right? They get in. It's not that
Right, they get in.
Our family is out. It's that they get in.
Yes, they get in, and then you have the father down there. And was there a fire at the time as well?
No, they put the fire out. Because it was like a lamp or something that got knocked over. They put the fire out. Actually, they thought it was okay, but the one of them realizes there's smoke, and the smoke is moving up the vents, and it's going to get out. They decide when the breathers are trying to break in, they do decide they're going to escape. There's a secondary little tinier vent somewhere.
Yeah.
They're going to get out. The little girl gets out. The mom gets out. But this is Alexander Skarsgård.
Yeah, he's not fitting.
With his big, broad shoulders, and he can't get out. And doesn't he try to intentionally dislocate his shoulder?
I think he does, yeah. But it still doesn't.
It's not enough.
It's not
because he's like 6'4".
Yeah.
And
this is a small,
opening. Vent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they get him. The breathers get him.
But we hear audio when that scene is happening. And it sounds like there's like something non-human down there. But we don't see that.
We don't see anything.
We hear it.
We're just focused on this family and what they're trying to do.
Right. And we hear that, so we automatically assume that it's the breathers that are making those sounds, not
anybody else.
Not anybody else.
We think it's and so does this family. They're assuming too it's the breathers.
Right.
Not the deer that have somehow come in. And then what do we see? Now we get to who the breathers actually are.
Right.
And what we find out is the breathers are uninfected human beings.
Yeah. U.S. military.
Wearing personal protective equipment. They're wearing respirators.
Yeah.
And when they breathe, the breathing makes a sound.
Right.
As with all respirators, not just Darth Vader. And that's how they're identified, or that's how this family is identifying them as breathers.
Right.
So now we're here, and then we see what happens. We see what the bigger problem is with whatever this disease is. That if you lose control of your emotions, and it sounds like you have to get angry or just really upset.
Yeah, and the threshold seems pretty...
It seems pretty high.
Like Alexander Skarsgård didn't turn until he was down there and his family was up above.
And the breathers were on him.
So it was a life or death situation for him. And that's when he turned.
And then he turns. And how are we describing the turned state? Just out of, because they weren't zombies.
They
right?
weren't
They didn't
zombies,
turn into zombies.
but they seemed stronger than a normal human, more agile, more obviously more aggressive. But he was able to take out, I mean, how many breathers were down there with him? At least 2 or 3 with armed.
At least.
And he was able to eventually survive that situation.
Yeah.
So maybe they have more of like a durability aspect too.
And
because I can't imagine the breathers would have went down there and not immediately started firing.
Right.
Why would they wouldn't try and contain him.
Right.
If like, what we've seen from the rest of the movie.
They do.
Maybe.
They do take.
They do trap them. Yeah, they do.
Once they get the 3 of them, they do test them with some very interesting
point of care diagnostic.
Do they take blood?
It does take blood. I think it might take blood.
They take blood. So it isn't that unrealistic. You take the blood and then you do something. Okay. But I do think that part of this expression of symptomology, don't they begin to like, can't you see like blood vessels or something is going on?
Their blood vessels start to pop out. They get black.
Yeah.
Kind of. They definitely have this almost turn to a zombie-like state, but we've been humanized with them the entire film.
Yeah.
So
I wouldn't say zombie unless you're saying zombie that's super aggressive and emotional, which we have seen in other movies.
Right.
We have.
Right. But these are people at the end, and they do turn. It seems like they do turn back to their own
if
state,
they calm down.
If they calm down.
So it's interesting that the government's choice in this particular movie is. It's not interesting. It's not unusual, I think, to want to test people and see what their exposure is. Because if they haven't been exposed, then they're just upset people. And, like, you need to... And
in that situation, people would be upset.
Right.
So how do you tell the difference?
So I thought that was fine. That they had to use some sort of test and they had a diagnostic, okay. But if they're calming back down...
Right.
Why is the choice to surround this little town and have breathers all over the place instead of saying, okay, well, if the issue is emotional, then let's like spray
airdrop Clonopin,
something
like some kind of anxiolytic. Yeah,
even tell them. Like, okay, look, this is what's happened.
Right.
You've been exposed to this. If you get too emotional, this other thing happens. We don't want that other thing to happen because you'll lose control and you might kill people. You might kill yourself. We don't know.
Right.
So now you have to take this medicine. And if you don't take the medicine, this might be a case where the government decides it's going to be extreme and now you have to be put somewhere.
If you're not going to take it.
So you don't have to take it, but you need to be put in jail or you need to be put somewhere else where you're not going to hurt yourself or other people.
Right.
So it becomes a public health, public safety thing. And we have rules on the books for that kind of thing. You're not allowed to be a danger to yourself or to other people.
Right.
Here in this country or anywhere else, everybody's got laws about that. So I can see that. But in this case, they're not even offered the opportunity.
Once they test positive, it's execution.
Was it execution?
I think it was. Yeah, I think that was
what was coming next.
That was what was coming next. They were going to execute them once they learned they tested positive.
So interesting, though, that is our approach to foot and mouth disease or mad cow disease. If that were to come here to the United States, well, if we even suspect that,
we're calling.
That's it. We're calling immediately. I mean, and look what happens with influenza in chickens. Right. They get avian influenza, and that's our go-to. We're calling all over the place.
Yeah.
Now, of course, those are animals, not human beings, but it's not unheard of
for us to
do that. But it also implies, I think, in the movie that maybe it's beyond this small place, and that's a pretty extreme measure to take. Right?
Yeah, I can't imagine it was localized to one city.
So they must have been trying things and trying things and trying things. Well, that's one option. And then someone says, okay, the only thing to do really is if they're infected, we have to kill them because we have to stop transmission. And this is how we're going to do it. Or not that much time has gone by. We don't have a treatment. And
we
apparently
don't
they're not
know.
using Valium or something.
Yeah, to keep them calm. Yeah.
In this movie. So in the meantime, while we're still trying to produce a vaccine or whatever treatment, we're going to kill people because we have to stop transmission. It's one or the other. So it's interesting. There's a policy timeline here too. It's not just
Right.
we find out as an audience about this disease or this outbreak or whatever it is, and we can get more and more information. It's also, okay, this is what's happening to people, and this is what's happening nationally.
Right. Like, it has to be a national policy, right?
It has to be. Somebody would have to authorize that. I think it would have to be. It's not enough to say that it's the Secretary of Health and Human Services declaring a public health emergency.
Because they don't have the authority to.
Right. Well,
to
it
do
could be the president.
It would have to be the president.
Could be a governor. Could probably authorize this because this is
with what military support?
National Guard.
I thought could a governor call on the National Guard without the support of a president?
The governor can call upon the National Guard because technically that's their asset.
Yeah.
The National Guard can be, called into active duty and made part of like the regular military.
Yeah.
But I don't know whose decision that is. And I think the governor would probably have to say yes.
Yeah.
But they always do say yes.
Right.
It's the reserves. If you're in the reserves, that's Department of Defense, not under the control of the governor. But the other thing about this use of the military, they have.
Well, there were F-16s called in.
The F-16s are called in.
Yeah.
But they might be in the National Guard.
Could they be?
I don't know. And could the National Guard call for, they can call for support from the military, from the active duty military. But the thing is, they have this PPE. It would have to be pretty advanced PPE, wouldn't it?
It would have to be.
Because otherwise you
if it's that airborne to the point where if I cut myself on an object just in nature, like anywhere, and then I get affected, you would have to have some really, really good PPE.
Really great PPE.
If it was that widespread.
And they're wearing gloves and everything, aren't they?
Yeah, the PPE I think looked great.
It looked great, but it's pretty fancy and high tech.
High tech.
They're not walking around in the blue suits that you see in
USAMRID, right? Exactly. Yeah, they're not walking around in that.
And they're not walking around in like the suits that astronauts are wearing.
Right.
This is
some like DARPA level stuff.
Tights, Elon Musk designed. Not just PPE, but full protective overgarments.
Yeah.
So that's interesting then. It could be that time has moved forward and they have been able to produce the PPE, but not yet produce a vaccine or some other treatment. And, now that I'm thinking about this, maybe Klonopin and whatever else
and Valium
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because it's viral or whatever it is, but we're assuming it's viral.
Yeah.
Or bacteriological or parasitic. And that it just doesn't, the human brain is just not responding to what it ordinarily would, because of course the mechanism is different.
Right.
Right.
I mean, if there's something that can tip you over the edge that much to the point where you're that aggressive, where you might kill, people that you care about.
Yeah.
Maybe, Valium might not work.
Right.
The strongest anti-anxiety medication that we have just might not have any effect on something.
Might not be enough.
Yeah, it might not be enough.
Figure out what the dosage is.
Right, yeah. So you, like the difference between a kid or someone like Alexander Skarsgård versus, the mother.
Right.
How do you determine that dosage between the three of them? There's three very different body types.
Right.
One's a child, one's a muscular dude. The other one is, probably your average woman or mother. How do you determine the dosage for that?
Right.
Especially when it's something that you don't know.
Yeah, and we don't know anything in this movie about susceptibility. Are there people who are exposed? I guess it's implied. If you're going to test somebody,
there had to have been people.
There have to be people who are
not infected.
Right. Or somehow.
And all the breathers have to not be infected.
Well, that's not true, because remember, the one guy, he gets his mask
torn off.
And he becomes infected, right?
Right, yeah.
So it's hyper airborne.
Yeah, hyper airborne.
It's extremely, extremely infective and fast moving within the body.
Yeah, to the point where if your mask is ripped off for
and then that's it.
a second, you're done.
Yes, because in that case,
and I think
he's already, full of adrenaline,
right,
trying to fight off Alexander Skarsgård in the first place, I guess, and then
while he's juiced up on this virus.
So as soon as the virus hits this guy, this poor military guy, that's it.
Yeah,
he's going to turn.
He's going to turn.
So that's basically the timeline of the disease, isn't it? And we get Skarsgård is shot, I guess, right? Isn't that how he dies?
I think he gets shot, but then his daughter turns, right?
Well, they get really upset. I know that.
Oh, yeah, they get upset. Yeah, everyone's upset.
I think she flips out. I think he survives the first shooting and then not the second shooting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. But then they escape. How do they escape the breathers?
I think it might have been the daughter who flipped out and killed
all of them?
Killed most of them, and then they got to another bunker with someone that we met at the beginning of the movie.
Right.
Who was like,
her friend, her childhood friend.
And like this is where all of the infected kind of are gathering.
So now everybody's living underground and in like sewers or
yeah, I think they went to the sewers. That's where they went.
So what I think is fascinating about that is that they still have heat signatures. So I guess that's why the military is still there. Right. They're hunting all these people, and they know that they're around.
Right.
And they are going underground. And it relates back to the title of the movie, right? They're looking for those who are
hidden. Right.
The disease is actually hidden. If you could stay calm, even with the disease, this is what this family demonstrates.
It's almost undetectable.
You won't be able to detect it.
Right.
Or it's not going to show itself unless you get really upset.
So I think that's like one of the things I loved about this movie was the entire time I thought the infected were on the outside. I had no idea that the entire time throughout the film, the main cast that we were watching were the ones actually infected with the virus.
Agree with you.
It completely flips the whole zombie or infection narrative on its head. Yeah, who's the enemy? Because you're throughout the entire film, you're rooting for them. Even once you figure out they're the ones who are infected, you're like, no, this is messed up.
It's utterly unfair.
If there's
that they get treated the way they do.
Yeah,
it's not their fault.
Right, and there's an alternative. It's not just you have to kill these people because it's not like they turn into mindless zombies who have just gone off and started killing people. No, this is controllable. They've learned to control it on their own. Right. So we can, if at the bare minimum, do some kind of medical intervention.
Well, and also, remember when the Russians were dealing with, I think they were Chechenian terrorists. Mm-hmm. They had gone to a symphony or maybe the opera or something. They were in a theater and they had taken the entire theater hostage. Yeah. And then the Russians, because they had been working on some kind of gas, I guess.
This is Soviet era?
I don't think it was Soviet era. It wasn't quite that long ago. But what the Russians decided to do was pump this into the theater.
The gas.
So what they thought was going to happen, or they hoped was going to happen, was that everybody would fall asleep, including the terrorists. Right. And then they could just walk in there and, extract the terrorists, and then everybody would just eventually wake up. But they had not done enough research, and it was a little too difficult to control. And what they wound up doing, if I'm remembering this correctly, was just killing everybody. Yeah. But the thought was a good one, I thought. Yeah. So similarly with this, I wonder, could you have, we're talking about Valium and things like that to keep people calm, but couldn't you also have rendered people unconscious somehow?
Maybe.
Could you spray propofol?
Yeah. So I think the issue with that is it's very, whenever someone goes under anesthesia, it's not just the same as going to sleep. Mm-hmm. You are literally being brought to the brink of death. Yeah. And then brought back. Mm-hmm. So the amount of drug that you're getting is very dependent on your body weight, your medical history, what kind of drugs you're taking,
metabolism,
all of that goes into account when they put you to sleep with something like propofol.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were just to I think, release propofol into a random environment with random people, you're going to have very different effects. Some people might just go to sleep. Some people might not even go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people are going to die.
Plus, I don't know how much you would do it because you're basically outside.
Right.
Even for the people who are this family that's underground in this bunker thing, there's still a big vent there. Their air is coming in from the outside. It's technically still outside. So how much would you even calculate? I mean,
right,
at least
exactly,
the Soviets or the Russians, they knew they had the blueprints for the theater.
Right.
They could walk around outside of it. They could see how big it was. They know what the total number of people, possible capacity, for the theater is. So you can sit there and calculate a bunch of things and try. In this case, if you're just outside, what if it's windy? What if...
Yeah, like how much of your drug are you losing to wind?
Right. How much would it take? I mean, you could just have to dump it on everybody, which then it takes us back to, then you might as well just be putting a chemical agent down on everybody and just kill everybody.
Right.
But it does make me wonder, there's that. I was wondering about propofol, and then there are the amnesics we were talking about.
Yeah.
Could you use an amnesic? But it would have the same physical challenges, right? In terms of how much to use, how much would you even...
Right, like how do you ensure that like the children...
What do we do? Yeah, because you have to treat them both at the same time. The children are standing there with their parents. It's not like they're separate.
Right.
Yeah, and are there enough medical personnel and respirators and things to go rushing in immediately after
to save them?
To save people.
It reminds me of that the Waco incident as well, where they just pumped tear gas in there, and not saying that was the cause of what happened. I don't think we have a definitive conclusion.
It's not controllable,
but it's not controllable. I don't think there's any way to tell whether some of that tear gas probably could have killed kids.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'm sure you're making the best determination you can. You know how many.
Yeah, exactly.
You're trying to.
You're trying to do the best you can, but it's imprecise.
Right. It's not the same thing as a person going in for surgery.
Right.
That's had all these blood tests and has had to get on a scale a million times, and you have full long history with, and you're already starting by putting them on a respirator.
Right.
Before anything happens.
Yeah, you're putting them on a respirator. You have an IV in them.
Right.
They're in the best possible scenario.
But interesting, too, that in this movie, they don't give the respirators to the people who are infected. They give them to
the others. Right.
So it's interesting. There's a whole environmental... And it's pre-COVID. So there's an environmental part of this.
Yeah.
It's not just inside the human body, once you've become infected, it's also outside, and apparently it's everywhere.
It's in the air. Yeah.
So it's interesting that, the kind of disease that they've created. So then the movie ends with them sort of
linking up with others, and there's a huge group of people, and they're going to try and survive it somehow. Yeah.
And I think you wish as an audience member, like, can't they just be left alone somehow to just live?
Yeah, like, why can't they just have their own, like, quarantine area?
Right.
Or something.
But now we get back to the nature of this and in the environment. It almost feels like this virus is moving on its own in the environment.
Right, yeah, it's flying.
And they can't control that.
Yeah. I
guess you couldn't. If it was really that airborne, how would you get it out of outside environment? If it was in a building, at least you could say, well, I mean, we'll just close off the building.
Yeah, close off the building. But if it's that much, I mean, I don't know. I also am skeptical that something could persist in the air, in outside air for that long. But I don't know. Like that's kind of what brings me back to maybe it was designed. Because I can't think of anything natural that would survive in the air. Anything that would survive in the air from that would persist for like a year or plus. Like,
yeah. What if it was so zoonotic that it was in like all of the animals?
But even like the organisms that are floating around, like there definitely are organisms that float around in the air. So maybe that's a possibility.
And maybe it's not a virus. Maybe it's a bacteria. And if it is, then maybe it sporulates. So it creates spores like
anthrax does. Yeah. and it can survive the UV from the sun
Right.
and stuff like that.
Because when we look at anthrax, we say that the spores occur because the disease is in an environment that for it is extreme. It's austere.
Yeah,
as we
austere.
talk.
Yeah,
And so it reacts and says, okay, I need to survive. And so I'm gonna make myself into a spore.
Right.
And then eventually when conditions change, then I'm going to unsporulate and I'm going to go back to being like the normal bacteria that I usually am and propagate inside, an animal or a person. So in this case, maybe that environment to us is not particularly extreme or austere, but perhaps for this particular bacteria,
it is.
It could be, in which case it becomes a spore, like really, really fast, and there's a whole lot of it around apparently.
Right, and you inhale the spore, and now all of a sudden, once the spore is in you, has an ideal temperature, ideal humidity, all of those things to where it can finally unsporulate and infect.
Right.
Something.
But it's interesting too, because if you go with that, then it's so sensitive to the environment that it becomes a spore, but then it enters a body. And now it doesn't matter what the environment is.
Right.
Anybody's environment is fine. It's just
fine. Yeah.
So it's a little
iffy.
Okay. So that's basically the life of the disease and the life of the movie.
Yeah, pretty much.
So this is where we're at. So we don't know how we were talking about the national response. Clearly, there's been a national response because you can't have, even if the National Guard's been dispatched, the governor okaying the National Guard to go do something and be shooting people is still something I think that the governor would have to run by the president of the United States.
Yeah,
Or
maybe.
the president, even if they don't, the president of the United States is not just going to allow random killings
and bombings,
and the use of military assets on American
soil
without some kind of, not just knowledge, there has to be some approval there.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that people from Washington are going out to wherever this is occurring, but I think the way the movie is set up, the White House knows, the president has approved. They may not like it, but this is what's happening. Just because the military is there, because DOD cannot activate itself,
right,
and just go off doing things, especially domestically. There are, we have some things that prevent that from happening. So it is interesting, though. You never do see anybody from CDC. You don't see anybody even from USAMRIID that you would kind of expect to see. Well, all you see are military personnel armed, wearing skin-tight protective overgarments and these respirators,
right,
which apparently are effective. All that stuff they're wearing is very effective,
right?
But that's all we see.
That's all we see.
We see no medical professionals.
Yeah, so they had to have given up very quickly. Mm-hmm. So maybe the place that we saw was not ground zero. Yeah. Maybe it happened somewhere else, and they were like, "We saw this happen somewhere else. We tried all these things. Now it's happening here. Mm-hmm. We're gonna bomb it." We don't
have a choice.
We don't have a choice.
We have to prevent people from leaving. And what you see in the movie is the family is trying to drive out.
Yeah.
What we don't know is maybe they closed the airport, and we just don't.
Right, and we just
don't know. Maybe they closed everything, the train stations, the bus stations.
Because they blocked off the roads.
We see F-16s in the air, but I would say, as we know from 9/11, you do not have F-16s flying around in the air, or any other aircraft for that matter, military aircraft, and have civilian aircraft also just flying around.
Right, exactly.
They would have grounded everything.
They would have grounded
which again is a national decision.
Right.
The FAA isn't just going to randomly say we're grounding everything. Somebody tells them we need to ground everything.
Yeah.
They have I think that they probably have some, power to ground in a limited area for some reason. But if the military is firing, there's no way
there's no other planes in the air.
Which means there's been a national decision.
Right.
So we know the military is involved. We know the White House is involved. I think that, and then probably the rest of the federal government, But I think this thing about the military and the actions they're being taken, that are being taken.
I think they're a little extreme, given what we know about how it's not like I said before. It's not a strict zombie outbreak where these people are going insane. It's just whether or not they get too overstimulated.
Right. So who gave this order?
Yeah, who gave this order where it was like, yeah, it's not worth even trying. Like, I feel like that had to be the decision. Like,
well, but no, because they do test them, right? So
they do test them.
Because if it was just, it's not worth even trying.
Right. They would have just
dropped a nuclear.
Right. They could have nuked the area. Right.
But if they didn't want to deal with the environmental fallout from that, then I think they would have just given the order, shoot to kill on site.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that.
They made them test first.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the rules of engagement.
Right.
You test, like you capture, test, and if they're positive, then execute.
Right. Or you capture and you test, and we already know everybody's going to come up positive. So we're just covering ourselves so that we can tell other people that we tested everybody first.
But if there are no witnesses left behind, why would they do that?
Well,
if there's supposed to be
the military people there. I mean,
sure, yeah. They're still the other.
Yeah, I don't know. So
it's interesting though, because it makes you wonder.
We don't know really what's going on. What's the situation there? All right. So So then we have. It is interesting though to think about the breathers and think about the military personnel. This is not something that military personnel are trained to do. And I'll tell you, especially since Vietnam and Korea, with some of the things that our military personnel wound up having to do and how that affected them psychologically, certainly over the decades since then, there has been a determined effort to, first of all, train people to not be indiscriminate in terms of who they're killing and how they're killing them.
Right.
Here in the United States, I mean, of course, because that falls under a whole separate set of rules, but definitely overseas and all the different actions. And we do hear about excessive use of force and people losing their minds in the military.
Like
well, but I mean, even more recently, don't you think? I think we've heard about some stuff happening in Afghanistan and other places. But it is the rest of the military that police it. They're the only ones that are there, right? So they're policing their own people and saying, this is excessive. We are reporting you to whomever in the chain of command. We are arresting you. So the military itself is policing itself.
Right.
So already. So I think, that was probably happening in this movie. But it's interesting that nobody that we see in the movie in the military is policing anybody. It doesn't look like anybody really has a. I mean, they might have a problem with it. I mean, and the one guy hesitates, right? Because he doesn't want to, kill the kid.
Yeah,
it's all very tough. But it's interesting because now you have an issue of doctrine. It's not just policy; it's military doctrine.
Right.
So for this movie, now doctrine has changed.
Right.
And what you think you're allowed to do, somebody had to have given them orders. There's no way.
No one, they wouldn't just be
a member of the military,
especially down on U.S. soil.
No way.
Yeah.
No.
Because, I mean, maybe in a different environment where I don't know. What do you think it could be more likely in a different environment versus on?
Well, I mean,
U.S. soil.
This is the environment. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's still a crazy situation. It's still an extreme situation. So
I think the rule would apply elsewhere too. You should not be just shooting people.
No, you shouldn't be.
People. These are not combatants,
right?
At least according to the traditional definition.
Definition of combatant, right?
So it is interesting, and then there may be an allowance for this. I'm not aware of that. In an extreme circumstance, this is what we're going to do, but doctrinally, it's not. It's just not there,
right?
And I wouldn't assume it would have been. So there's been enough time for the doctrine to change too, inside the Department of Defense to say, okay, so this is what we're going to do, and maybe they call for volunteers or something for people who can do this for the greater good. But it's fascinating to me because we talk about population health. That is public health.
Yeah.
And it's clear in this movie a decision has been made, probably, to shoot these people. Anybody that's been infected has to be shot. Now, we don't know how long this is going on for. Like, it could be until we have a vaccine. It could be until we have a treatment. It could be until we have some kind of control mechanism. But until then, we've decided we're shooting people.
Yeah.
If they come up
If they come up positive.
How does that decision get made? What do we do about the Department of Defense, which is not set up to say, oh, yeah, this is what.
Yeah, we're going to shoot America.
We're going to do that.
Yeah.
You know, no one's even been trained to do that.
Yeah.
So it is interesting that this is this piece of it. Now, the other possibility, JT, is that these are not military personnel whatsoever, and that instead they're contractors.
Like a PMC?
Like Blackwater. You know, these contractors.
Like private military.
Private military, the mercs.
The mercs,
Who every once in a while we hear about these problems, about them going wrong and doing things. Now, look, I have to say, the vast majority of these contractors are former military. They're not off doing horrible, terrible things, but we hear about it every once in a while. So it is possible. We're having this whole military conversation that this is not the military.
Right.
Although they might have been paid by the military to go off and do something that the actual active duty military could not and did not want to.
And think about it too. If this outbreak or this pandemic or whatever was as bad as it is, you probably lost a significant portion of the population. You probably lost a big portion of your reservists. You probably lost a big portion of your armed forces. So now you're reaching out to these PMCs who are based overseas. Mm-hmm. They might, if we were the first ones hit, those are the first people you're going to call to come and help you.
And whenever we have a pandemic, like a really, really bad one, and I know COVID was bad, but we're talking about zombie apocalypse, everybody's dying, etc. In that case, the military, we have a tendency in our plans to call upon the military. We say it all the time. Oh, we'll just ask the military to come in.
And we did it for COVID. Yeah.
We did for COVID. We do it for a lot of things. But in an extreme situation, the Department of Defense does say, you can't necessarily count on us to come to your aid and be part of this plan, because if we're limited, if we too have been hit, and all this stuff is going on throughout the world,
right?
We have a national security issue, and our first priority is to protect the nation. Right. We may have to be facing outward, not inward.
Right.
So, and if they took a hit in terms of percent that have been affected by this disease, or maybe even some other disease, then even more so, they have to be faced outward, because we don't want to sustain an attack from our enemies that might take advantage of the situation. So it might not even be the military itself.
Right.
Although, even so, the military would have to have been involved in bringing in mercenaries or whoever to do this. So it's just it's a fascinating world they've created here. But these are huge implications, and you do wonder about how you create policy and how you deal with doctrine and all this stuff when this disease is not behaving the way any other disease behaves.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned like this one thing happens with this one disease, but we've never seen a disease like this.
Right.
So this is a unique thing that they created for this movie.
Right.
And you talked about the final twist in your introduction. The final twist is actually plural, right? There are twists.
Yeah.
Right. That the infected people are not the breathers, but in fact the family that you've grown to love, and the people that are still there in this town. There's the twist that it's the government that's
really the bad,
and has made these decisions.
It's like awful, draconian,
and it's totally un-American too.
Un-American,
right? This is not in keeping with what we say we would do with our own people. We're not giving these people any kind of agency.
Right.
No choices have been provided that we can tell.
Right.
So, it's just twist after twist after twist after twist. And I think that's why when you get to that point and you realize who the breathers are and what they're about, and you realize what the disease is and who's affected and all of that, you're hit like by 8 different.
Yeah, it's like getting hit by a truck. You're like, this is not.
Again and again and again.
Yeah.
Right? That's what makes it so dramatic, in my opinion. I would say, too, though, that you get to the twist, and what I like about this movie is you have the gigantic twist. Some movies would just sort of end it there, but they continue.
They continue. And they almost like when that fight scene is happening between the breathers and the family, like, you're still kind of shaken by the fact of that twist. But in that moment, you're like, no, I'm rooting for the family to kill everyone around here and get away.
Right.
So it kind of puts you in this like weird mental state where you're like, oh yeah, no, I'm rooting for. Like, I think that's like a good genius of the movie, is that it makes like, even after you've realized that, you're still like, I want to root for them because that's the right thing. And I think that's something that the movie did just really, really well.
Right.
Compared to any other movie before, like where the zombies are mindless, or, the people who are infected are, completely lost causes. I think that this really turns that whole genre on its head.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't go the way you think.
Yeah, not at all.
Should.
Yeah.
So I would say, look, we at the commission watch this stuff not just because it's entertaining or because we're interested in biodefense, but also that we're doing something that I think everybody needs to do in the government, at all levels of government, and that probably individuals should be doing too. I think we should be looking at these movies and then asking, okay, so what are the implications?
Right.
We talk a lot about preparedness. The fact that these people are in a bunker in the first place that's really well stocked is like, you want to give them a thumbs up. Somebody thought,
yeah, they figured it out.
I mean, near a school, so all those little kids, one imagines, would be able to take advantage of this bunker.
Right.
It wasn't that big, but so they get good points for preparedness, but they were not prepared for this situation. I don't know that anybody could.
Anybody could be. You're going up against
the
U.S.
one thing
military.
they're missing in that bunker, I would say, is we don't have any not that we could see. There were no
antibiotics.
Maybe some. If they had some antibiotics, it was probably like a little bottle of antibiotics.
Yeah, like a little bottle,
like 100
amoxicillin or something.
Yeah, something like that. Cipro.
Yeah, Cipro.
And we don't see. I mean, obviously, they don't have respirators.
Right.
So I think there's an implication there. We have a tendency to think that the Strategic National Stockpile will take care of a bunch of that stuff. We'll move it. We'll get it out somewhere. But given the time frame in which this disease is moving so quickly, there's no time to be moving that stuff around.
No, these people had to get out in like day one.
Immediately.
Yeah.
And, Dr. Shalala on our commission talks about, where are people used to getting their stuff? They're not used to getting their medical countermeasures from the Strategic National Stockpile from some pallet. They're used to going down to the local pharmacy to get their stuff.
Or Walgreens
But in order for the local pharmacy to be able to do anything, A, they have to have some time.
Right.
But B, they too have to have some stuff there. Otherwise, they're ordering and they're waiting on a physician to order something, and then they have to order in the system, and then the system has to move. It's going to be at least days, if not weeks, to get what might be useful in this situation. So there's a preparedness thing there too. It's not just about the individuals. Yeah. It's about the organizations that might be able to do something.
Right.
I think that there are implications too for policy at like all these different levels. What did the mayor of this little town do? What did they think?
Right.
What happens if the mayor is gone? Same thing with the governor. So, we're assuming that the governor had some
role, but maybe he was infected and.
Yeah. Or not.
Or not.
And she's just doing the best that she can or he can to he's sending assets, maybe not. the PPE, like you mentioned it earlier,
Yeah.
because it's like some DARPA thing. Well, maybe, but then somebody had to manufacture that. So
Right.
we need some preparedness there too. We talk about manufacturing capability. That's fine. But do we have the capacity to do that and do it fast? Or are we waiting
Right.
on the domestic production Act or whatever, and to tell car manufacturers to switch over as if that's going to happen quickly?
Right. And that's going to take forever.
It's going to take quite a long time.
It's going to take a
And they're
while.
not going to be able to do everything. Right? Even in that case, they were producing respirators, I think, and some
pieces of
equipment, not full-scale vaccine, antivirals.
They didn't like full sets of PPE.
Any of it. Any of it, obviously, because I think that, at least not in the time frame that we see.
And we needed it.
Yeah. None of that has gotten to these people. None of it has.
None of it has.
So, for us, we address PPE, the need for PPE, in our reports.
Yeah.
We have our SLTT report where we talk about some of the response requirements and capabilities necessary. We talk about pharmacies, the role of pharmacies, trying to rethink the strategic national stockpile and what that should really mean for the country, because you want things pre-positioned. You don't want everything sitting in one place and then distributing it somehow. We talk about more than just states and localities. We talk about the tribes and territories.
Right.
To look at the geography of this particular movie, there could very well have been a tribe.
It could have been a tribe, that was nearby.
What's going on with them? They don't generally have access to the same health care that everybody else does, and who knows? Maybe they're in a better situation because they are more isolated intentionally. They're not. They might not be interacting. And what do you do about that? You want to protect that. If that's the case.
If that's the case, you want to protect them.
But we don't have a tendency to give.
We don't have a tendency to
a lot of resources to the tribes, but maybe that's there too. I think the issue of the territories as well. If this is
mainland USA,
then suddenly the territories have become a really important part of our U.S. national security.
Right, like Puerto Rico becomes
only
safe haven that we have.
A safe haven, and maybe the only citizens we have.
Yeah.
And yet we don't want to give them the same rights to vote. They might be where government continues.
Like the United States, like the capital after this movie might be in Puerto Rico.
Or Alaska.
Or Hawaii, or Guam, or it could be anywhere. I mean, if it got that bad in the mainland U.S., I mean, like islands always have a unique advantage when it comes to infectious diseases.
Right.
They always
unless the disease start there.
Unless they
in which case they have the natural, ocean preventing
the spread.
But there are implications here for continuity of government. What does it mean? If it's this bad and it's moving this fast, what are we talking about? So continuity of government. I think we have a continuity of government, not just continuity of, but actual government, because it's clear it's the government that's making these decisions. It's not these people sitting around a group saying, gee, what do you think we should do? I think we should shoot each other, on site.
On site. It's not that.
Right. So there's a governmental thing. I imagine that there's been some planning. I know that DOD did consider a zombie scenario. So they did some planning, but DOD is not the government, right?
Right.
So then you have to ask the question, has FEMA, I think they were responsible for the high level continuity of government stuff, for the government planning. I would say, after COVID and everything, it seems unlikely that these extreme biological scenarios have been taken into account sufficiently in terms of government plans. But then one can only hope that they have. Maybe they have, and we wouldn't know. All that stuff would be classified.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about it, though, like on a scale from something like COVID to a total zombie apocalypse, Hidden falls somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Because it's not a total zombie apocalypse. There is absolutely hope for these people to function as normal human beings. So I don't know if have they considered something like that. That's not a total worst case scenario, but that is somewhere, threaded between the middle of where you have people that you could save and probably you absolutely should save. Obviously, it'd be easier to take the route that they did in the movie, but have they considered that kind of a scenario?
I don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know.
We don't know, but one can only hope that that's, for those that are generating and then using scenarios to inform plans. I hope that, especially given the fact that we have more and more and more and more infectious disease events that we're dealing with on the planet and in this country, that we have multiple pandemics going on at the same time, that we had the impact of COVID, that we've had to call millions of avians, that all this stuff is happening. I would hope that the planning, the scenario development, and so forth would have increased. That we're not fooling ourselves into thinking like, oh, not only will COVID not happen again, but the scenario that we saw in this movie wouldn't happen again.
Right.
I would hope not. And I would also say, given the emotional reaction that you and I had to this movie, and how into it we were, that to me that makes it clear that the viewing public, if you're going to react that way to a movie, you're going to react that way at least to
a real life.
That much to real world.
It's a real world situation.
So we owe it to the public.
Yeah.
The government does, and those of us in the private sector do too, to examine these things and take it seriously and start with the assumption that the public is going to care.
Right.
And that this isn't going to be acceptable to them. This draconian decision that we have to kill everybody on site, but only after we issue a diagnostic test. I think that's just really important, and I think that the film has done a really good job of showing us, those of us in the policy arena, that is the case.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think it's interesting that this is the film that they came out with before Stranger Things.
Why do you think that?
I think it's interesting because people probably don't know about this film, but everybody knows about Stranger Things. And this came out a year before by the same people.
Who knows?
I don't know.
And interesting, too, that these same people did not, after COVID or even during COVID, say, hey, we did
this other movie. Yeah.
They should. I think Hollywood needs to.
Yeah.
Clearly they're paying attention. I think Hollywood understands that audiences are interested and concerned and worried about these things, about diseases and their impact enough that they're willing to continue to do movies. It's not as if this is the only movie that's come out recently. There are plenty of them.
Right. Yeah. Plenty of them.
And plenty that we're going to talk about in this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the relevance to our recommendations, I think I would give this a 3.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I think it does address the need for preparedness. It addresses the role of the military, the role of the government. It addresses pandemic management, epidemic management.
Yeah.
We may not agree with how it was undertaken, but you can imagine that they had an SOP and they executed it.
Right.
They did an excellent job with PPE. There was at least PPE,
right.
In it. So yeah, I think a 3. I would give it a 3.
Okay, so for category 2, scientific accuracy, I was thinking a 3.
Yeah, me too. I think that the science,
it's not really well explained.
Well, and even when remember at the beginning of the movie when the mother,
oh my gosh,
she's cut her hand, but she looks up and she says, "It's airborne."
As if it's...
What do those two things have to do with each other?
It's not completely contaminating the air. Like, there's no way. So that just doesn't make sense.
Those two things did not go together.
So I would give it a 3 for that.
Yeah.
For scenario development, I would probably say a 4.
Oh, I gave it a 5.
You did?
Yeah.
I gave it a 4 because certain aspects of the scenario didn't feel as realistic, like just mainly the opening parts of the film.
Why is that?
With the Air Force coming in to bomb the town. I just didn't know if that was because like it's very quickly like they hear about something on the news and then all of a sudden it's
but it's them that just heard about something on the news.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
We don't know what was going on and what was being picked up.
Right.
I mean, I would like to think that we wouldn't be bombing people just because they got ill.
Right.
However, that was the scenario. And I didn't think they had like one singular, fighter jet. That would have been unrealistic.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I think for what they were going for, I would give it a 5. But if you think there were parts that were unrealistic, I mean,
no, I see your point.
Unrealistic, evidence of airborne transmission with somebody having a cut hand is not. That's totally unrealistic.
But is that part of the scenario, or is that part of kind of the scientific accuracy? Because like the scenarios, like I think I'm agreeing with you that maybe it should be a 5 because the world does build without too many logical or any logical inconsistencies.
In terms of development, we don't get the scenario right up front.
Exactly.
Right, and so it builds and builds and builds, and you're figuring things out as it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you want to give it a 5?
Yeah, let's give it a 5.
Okay.
Okay. So for success of imagination, I'm sorry.
No,
entertainment value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, entertainment value. I give it a 5.
I give it a 5 too. I just thought it was interesting from the very beginning, and there were twists and turns, and it captured my thinking. I don't want to just say imagination, my thinking. It made me keep thinking, what's going on with this biological situation?
Yeah,
what's happening? What's the impact? What's the illness? What are they trying to avoid?
Right. It was just super engaging, start to finish. Like you're kind of locked in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a 5.
And it wasn't boring.
No, yeah, it wasn't boring either.
Yeah.
So then it's success of the imagination and creativity, which again I would give a 5.
Oh, I gave it a 4.
You did? I would give it a 5 because of the way that the zombies or the infected aren't like the threat in the movie that you don't think they're the threat. So maybe that's more of the shock.
It's more of surprise.
So I'd be fine giving it a 4.
So, well, let's think about it. What was creative about it, really?
I think the creativity was the switch.
The switch. Yes, that's true. The story was very creative because it comes as such a surprise.
Right.
What the issue is. Okay, let's give it a 5.
Okay, sounds good. Shocker surprise value.
5. Yeah.
That ending is just.
Well, not just the ending. I think also when you find out who the breathers are.
Yeah.
The whole time you're thinking they're the enemy, they're the infected, or they're whatever. Right. And in fact, they are kind of the enemy, but they are not the infected.
Right. They're
the breathers because they have PPE. That's why they're breathers.
Right. Yeah. So I give it a 5.
Yeah. But you're right. The surprise ending, I didn't see that they're not zombies, are they? What are they? Are they vampires? What are they?
They have heightened levels of aggression or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, whatever they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Policy.
I give it a 2.
Yeah, me too. I think the policy of bombing people just because they're infected is not great. I mean, they didn't even give them a chance to
evacuate,
get it under control. It was not even evacuate. I can understand telling people you have to stay where you're going to be, and we're going to evacuate you. You can't go anywhere. I don't have any issue with that whatsoever. Too bad for them. Mm-hmm. But I do not think it's a good policy to say what we're going to do in such a short period of time is bomb the crap out of these people.
Right.
And especially considering it didn't even work.
No, yeah, it didn't work. People went underground.
And then they didn't. And I grant it looks like they were trying to find out whether they had gotten everybody or not. But that was just a bad policy decision, just in and of itself, number one. And then I think there are other policy decisions that we can see kind of throughout. And we question, like when the breathers first find them, they're taking specimens out of them, whether the person is giving permission or not.
Right.
I think they could have told everybody to just
relax,
be calm.
Yeah.
We just need to draw some blood and see where you're at. And they, that family knew they were infected.
Right. They knew.
So, what's the big, scary thing about that? You have to give some blood. I don't think that would have been such a big deal if they hadn't been so aggressive.
Right.
The breathers hadn't been so aggressive with them. I mean, that's a terrible policy in and of itself.
Yeah, I completely agree. So yeah, I think a 2 is the right.
Fair.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Portrayal by the actors, I think I give that a 5.
Well, okay.
Unless there was one.
I thought the portrayal by the breathers, the people who were acting as the breathers, I wasn't excited about that. They didn't strike me as people. They were not believable as CDC people.
Definitely.
And they were not believable as military people. There's some kind of conglomeration of each. But you gave it a 5? I gave it a 3. So why don't we give it a 4?
Yeah, we'll give it a 4.
Okay. Direction.
I gave it a 4.
Me too. I think that the stuff when they're inside the underground dwelling.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was directed really well. But...
And the pacing, too, I think.
The pacing of that was really good. But then... I did not think the direction, once they get out and the breathers are around, I just didn't think that was great.
Mm.
I didn't think, pretty much from that point on, it's almost as if they'd had a static camera, and just sort of showing you what was happening. It wasn't necessarily dramatic, although at the same time, maybe it didn't need to be, because really it was on the actors to sell
that
act.
kind of, yeah.
Then I would give it a 4.
Yeah. Okay, let's stick with a 4.
Okay.
And my iPad just died. So what's the last category? Production. I gave that a 4.
Okay.
There wasn't really much production value it had to do because it's in such an enclosed space. It's really only, I feel like, at the beginning and the end of the movie, like when there has to be some kind of effects.
I thought that they could have done for all the sound effects for the breathers. I think they could have done a better job with the actual PPE they were wearing in the end.
Yeah, I agree.
It didn't seem like enough. I think they needed a bit more. I imagine they were trying not to go Darth Vader, right?
Exactly.
And get too carried away with it. But this just seemed like higher level stuff you can get at Home Depot or something.
Yeah.
It just didn't feel like it was enough for the horrifying situation in which they all found themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't think you'd be sending a team or teams of people with just PPE to go root out people who are infected.
Right.
Right? They weren't vaccinated. They're just wearing PPE.
And that was it.
And if that's what's gonna happen and the PPE works 100%, that's wonderful, but then you shouldn't be able to get it off.
Yeah, it shouldn't be able to come off that easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree.
So I just thought stuff like that was not.
So what did you get it?
Totally great. I gave it a 4.
A 4? Okay.
So this movie gets a 3.8.
A 3.8.
Oh.
Interesting.
Okay.
All right.
Despite the fact that it got a bunch of 5s, but I think, the scientific accuracy and the thing about the policy, that's not something under the control really of anybody. Like that's written that way, but we have to rate it.
We have to rate it. Yeah.
Same thing with the recommendations. It's not like anybody's in Hollywood is know yet about our recommendations.
Not yet, at least.
Okay, so yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we doing next, JT? Which movie are we going to do next?
So I think we agreed we're going to do Gen V.
Okay.
Next.
Gen V next, which is not a movie.
It's a TV show.
It's a TV show.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we're going to do Gen V next because there's a virus featured in that, which also kind of has a similar...
Don't say too much. Okay. I haven't seen it yet.
I won't say anything. Okay, I won't say anything.
Okay. Thank you for listening to our first Biollywood podcast. I think that if you have comments or questions, that you should go to our Facebook page. And I think that if you want to recommend movies for us to, or TV shows or books or whatever, for us to look at, that you should let us know.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Okay.
All right.
All right.